Belgium's wage indexing system has drawn global attention for its effectiveness in mitigating the economic fallout of crises, including inflationary periods, global energy disruptions, and other economic shocks. While many nations grapple with balancing worker protection and economic growth, Belgium's model has provided a framework that preserves purchasing power, supports stability, and enhances economic resilience. However, one place that fared remarkably well was Belgium, where real wages actually rose by 2.9%. Not only that, but Belgium has also enjoyed relatively strong GDP growth since the pandemic, with real GDP increasing by just under 6% since the end of 2019, well above the Eurozone average and neighboring countries like France and Germany. In 2023 alone, Belgium grew by 1.5%, triple the Eurozone average and well above its forecast. This is made even more impressive by the fact that Belgium is already a wealthy country, so none of this growth can be attributed to catching up. According to IMF data, Belgium has a GDP per capita of $55,600, slightly behind the Netherlands but ahead of Germany. The main reason Belgium's economy has fared better than most of its Eurozone peers is actually quite simple: its unique wage indexation mechanism. In short, in Belgium, wages automatically increase in line with inflation. Technically, wages increase once the 4-month average of the so-called health index exceeds a certain threshold, usually 2%. For context, the health index is very similar to the normal consumer price index, CPI, which measures the changes in the price of a basket of goods and services that the average household might buy. However, the health index strips out certain goods like alcohol, tobacco, and petrol. While there are a couple of exceptions, this indexation mechanism covers the vast majority of private and public sector employment, making Belgium's system almost unique in Europe. While there are wage indexation mechanisms in some other European countries, Belgium's is probably the most comprehensive, perhaps rivaled only by Luxembourg's similar scheme. For example, in Spain, wage indexation clauses are common in collective wage agreements, but they only cover about 2/3 of private sector contracts. In France, a complicated indexation mechanism mostly applies to minimum wage workers, who represent less than 15% of private sector employment. This is the main reason why the Belgian economy has fared so well recently. Like other European countries, Belgium has suffered a decline in exports over the past few years, partly because the global economy has slowed, reducing demand for goods and services generally, and partly because of a global rise in protectionism. Countries like the US and China are increasingly resorting to tariffs and other measures to protect their domestic industries, which has hurt Europe. European industries relied on foreign markets to compensate for Europe's lackluster domestic demand, as evidenced by the EU's recurring trade surpluses. Unlike Germany, however, Belgium has been able to make up for this shortfall in foreign demand with domestic demand, fueled by strong wage growth. This is a recurring theme. Almost every time we look at a European economy escaping Europe's wider economic malaise, it seems to be due to stronger wage growth, allowing them to offset declines in exports. This is because, as much as politicians focus on exports, in most developed countries, exports account for a relatively small fraction of GDP. Most economic activity is driven by the domestic economy. The answer lies in the risk of so-called wage price spirals. Governments and central banks worry that strong wage growth and wage indexation mechanisms could create a cycle where inflation leads to higher wages, which fuels stronger demand, resulting in more inflation, which leads to higher wages, and so on. In fact, wage indexation mechanisms used to be more popular in Europe, but many countries abandoned them in the 1970s and 1980s. This was largely due to the inflationary pressures of the Arab oil embargo in 1973, which triggered a dramatic increase in oil prices. Wage indexation mechanisms exacerbated wage price spirals, leading to unacceptably high inflation levels and social unrest. Even today, the European Central Bank, ECB, advises against them. While inflation in Belgium has been slightly higher than average, peaking at 12.2% in October 2022, compared to 10.2% for the Eurozone. It has since come down remarkably fast. By October 2023, inflation in Belgium had fallen to nearly 0%, compared to 2.9% in the Eurozone. Since then, it has fluctuated around 3%, which is higher than the ECB's 2% target, but nowhere near levels that would trigger a destabilizing wage price spiral. Rather, the main problem with wage indexation mechanisms in Belgium has been their impact on state finances. The mechanism requires steep increases in public sector salaries and forces the government to keep headline inflation low, which has recently involved significant spending to tamp down energy prices. Belgium's energy support package included steep tax cuts, with VAT on electricity and gas reduced from 21% to 6%. These measures have weighed on Belgium's public finances. Belgium ran a deficit of 3.6% of GDP in 2022, which rose to 4.2% in 2023 and is projected to reach 4.6% in 2024, well above the EU's 3% target. While this wouldn't be catastrophic, it's problematic given Belgium's hefty national debt, which exceeds 100% of GDP and is rising. Belgium isn't at acute risk of a debt crisis anytime soon, but the general lesson here is that in the 21st century, the main risk of a wage indexation mechanism isn't a wage price spiral, it's the strain on state finances. Making videos like this requires a lot of effort and research, which is expensive. Running TLDR this year has cost just under £800,000. This issue focuses on the 29 biggest elections of this year, China's trade issues, Biden's successes and failures, the UK's new opposition leader, and the wars in Ukraine and Gaza. And that's the latest on today's top stories. What are your thoughts? If you'd like to dive deeper into any of these topics or explore related issues, feel free to leave a comment. Thank you for tuning in and spending your time with us. Stay informed, stay curious, and we'll see you next time. Take care.